passing the slide changer, the ceremonial slide changer. I'm really happy to be here. I now live in Chicago, so I'm always happy to come back to California, but I lived here for 15 years and can't seem to stop doing studies of California school districts. So this is actually the first time that we're reporting data from this study that we've been involved with for a couple years. So be kind, but also give us lots of feedback, because we're in a place where we're able to improve the way that we're doing this work and to draw better conclusions from it. This is a large cast of characters. I just want to show there's a lot of people involved with this, and particularly thank our funders, the Heising-Simons Foundation and the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund. And I just want to start, so often pre-K to 3 alignment lives in early education departments. They're the ones who are kind of pushing it up. They're the ones that are getting the grants to support it. And research on these initiatives also tend to focus on the activities of early education departments as well. But as one leader of an early education department told me 2 days ago when I was interviewing her, this is sort of just-in-time data analysis on my part, she said, quote, early education is not, she said this with a great deal of fervor, early education is not just in pre-K. Preschool to third grade alignment is bigger than early education departments. And we've taken this stance, close quote. So we've taken this stance in our research. We look at the specific things that the early education departments in the two school districts that we study are doing to foster pre-K to 3 alignment and continuity, but we situate those strategies within district and schools' overall strategies for instructional improvement, in this case in mathematics. And the goals of our study are to document efforts to create alignment and continuity between pre-K and elementary and mathematics at schools and district level, and to investigate how these efforts are experienced by teachers and students, and to measure how these efforts influence students' learning opportunities, their perceptions of math, and their mathematical proficiency. And so we have this sort of, one back, come on, up. It's a little touchy. Yeah, it's touchy. It's user error on my part, I think. We have this sort of crazy study. It is multi-level and longitudinal. So we collect data at the district, the school, the classroom, and the student level, and we do it over time. So last year, we focused, for the classroom and kid part, we focused on pre-K classrooms and students, and and this year we followed those students into TK and K, and pending, hopefully the happy results of a grant we're writing right now, we'll follow those students up through 2nd grade. And so the idea is both to understand how kids move through grades as they, how they engage with mathematics instruction and how that influences their views of math and their mathematical proficiency, but situating that within schools and school districts. And our methods, like super simplified, is we studied 2 mid-sized California districts, and I'm not giving you a lot of information about those districts because we're keeping them confidential. And the second I show you the demographics, you're going to know which districts these are. You're too informed an audience. And we pick those districts because they're doing work in this area. These are districts that have a commitment from the highest levels to support creating better connections between early childhood and elementary. We wanted to learn from them what it takes to do this work, what the challenges are, and how the work that they're doing is experienced at schools and classrooms. And so we interview the district leaders in early education, but also in curriculum and instruction, and also in whatever structure they have for school supervision. So these are often the assistant superintendents who are supervising elementary schools. And we observe their professional development in all 3 divisions. At the school level, we have 3 schools per district. All these schools have pre-Ks, many of them also have TKs on site, and the pre-Ks and TKs are supervised by the school principal. Not every district kind of organizes themselves that way. Both of these districts also have standalone early childhood centers, and we're not focusing on those for this particular study. And at the school level, we interview the school principals, APs, coaches. We interview and survey teachers every year, pre-K to grade 2. And then at the classroom level, we observe last year we observed the pre-K classes. This year we're observing the TK and the K classes 3 times a year. We are doing a mathematics assessment in the fall and the spring of each year, and we interview students in the winter. If anybody wants to talk about interviewing 4-year-olds, we've developed some really interesting and super fun ways of doing it. It's been a great experience for us. So today we're going to talk, I'm going to talk about data just from last year. And so we're not going to go into the classroom observation or the student outcomes. You'll have to come find me in another 6 months or so and I can talk about that part. So we're really going to talk about what the adults are trying to do to create these stronger pathways, what helps them do this work, and what gets in their way, and how that work is experienced by teachers and school principals. Okay. So alignment and continuity in instructional policy is incredibly challenging for any district to achieve for some of the reasons that Deborah talked about a few minutes ago. I mean, some of its history. Historically, early childhood departments have been sort of the poor stepchild of school districts. They're often physically in a really different place and have really developed parallel structures for a lot of the time, parallel transportation, parallel food, parallel teacher hiring, et cetera. And they're also funded by 2 completely different systems. So not only is there the history, there's current things that tend to hold these separations in place. So what this means is that district leaders are swimming against the tide as they seek to create more seamless educational opportunities for children. So I call the 2 districts District A and District B. I've not gotten clever yet about pseudonyms. And these 2 districts made different strategic choices to bridge these historically separate policies and processes. And these different strategies matters for points of connection and disconnect when the policies played out at the school level. So really, really big picture and simplified. District A placed greater emphasis on instructional improvement systems and school leadership development. And District B placed greater emphasis on teaching and learning in mathematics. They really laser-like focus on the math. And as I move forward to talk about the district strategies, I want to emphasize that both districts are doing strong and important work, and it's challenging to do all this work at the same time. So they've placed their bets in different places, and also there's been some constraints, like historical and district cultural constraints that shape sort of where they place their bets. So this is not a horse race. It's really meant as an investigation of how these different strategic paths are experienced on the ground in schools and classrooms. I also want to emphasize, and you all know this, that the work continues. So this is data from last year. I was in one of the districts the last couple of days. Things have changed already. This is a constant fluid process. So starting with District A, their efforts to foster connections between early childhood and elementary sat within a larger system to foster instructional improvement pre-K through grade 12. The central administration had worked for a number of years to develop an interlocking systems of support that have many of the strategies that many of you are familiar with. There was a system of instructional walkthroughs. The walkthroughs were guided by a instructional framework that outlined expectations for classroom practice consistent with Common Core. They had PLCs at multiple levels of the systems. There were grade level PLCs, there were principal PLCs. Folks in the district are involved in, I believe, multiple PLCs. Data use was thread throughout these, data from interim assessments, the rubrics used through the walkthroughs, and at the teacher level formative assessments. And while many of these approaches are familiar, what is very interesting and what I learned a lot from in this district is the way that these pieces of the puzzle were enacted at multiple levels of the system. So, for example, the walkthroughs involved people at the central office and school leaders, which is really common, but they also involved people at different departments in the district. The PLCs were not just among teachers, they were among principals, they were among school district leaders, and they were sort of guided by a common framework for having conversations about data. So many of these elements also, not all, but many of them included early childhood within these systems. They also invested pretty intensely in learning opportunities for school leaders. The early education department put into place quite an in-depth professional development on learning and instruction for early childhood. By last year, I believe it was 80% of the elementary principals had gone through this process. It was a multi-week set of experiences where people were learning stuff, going back to their schools, collecting data, bringing it back, having conversations, and the focus was really on helping school leaders understand what high-quality instruction looks like in the early childhood classrooms. And then there was also ongoing opportunities to learn the school leader PLCs and walk through structures that were common to all principals in the district. So many of these structures were content neutral, meaning the instructional framework was not specific to a given, to a particular subject matter. And when they were focused on a particular content, it tended to be literacy. So that is important to understand for when we go and look in schools and look at mathematics instruction, what happened. During the period of our study, there was a little bit less focus on mathematics teaching and learning. The district adopted 3 commercial mathematics curriculum, PK, TK, and elementary. And they created a scope and sequence to guide teachers in using the curricula in a way that connected to students. I collaborate with math educators on our team, and we did a really in-depth analysis of the curriculum and the assessments in the teacher PD, where we looked at the math and the way that the math built over time. If anybody's interested in that, I can talk to you later, share some stuff about that. But we found that these 3 curricula, even with a scope and sequence, had gaps and overlaps, creating challenges to continuity. And it's a hard task. We have to recognize it's a hard task to take 3 different curriculum and try to knit them together. There was also, the interim assessments were well aligned in terms of content. They were less so in terms of what we call cognitive demand, which is the cognitive challenges we're asking kids to do when we give them a particular task. So in kindergarten, the cognitive demand was lower than the curriculum, and in 1st and 2nd grade, the interim assessments was actually harder than the curriculum. And then the teacher professional development model was similar especially across PK, TK, and K. But they were also similar to the mathematics department, who handled professional development from 1st grade on up. However, there was little PD focus on mathematics during the year, and there's some reasons for that I can talk about if anybody's interested. So the comparison is with District B. And they made some different strategic choices. After doing a lot of structural work to create connections to the early years, they were structural work meaning they had single-site leadership at the school. They elevated the role of the early education director. They spent a lot of time focusing on issues of curriculum and instruction during the year of our study. Rather than purchasing commercial curricula linked to the new state standards, the district decided to develop their own. And they did so by collaboration between the early ed department and the elementary math department. And they created curriculum units that had a common structure and also an emphasis on common pedagogical approaches. And these curriculum units were linked to the California Early Foundations and Common Core Standards in Mathematics. We analyzed these curriculum units as well, and we found a high level of continuity across the grades. That is, the content built on each other from pre-K up through grade 2, and there was also consistency and cognitive demand across the grades. And what was particularly striking about this, and if anybody has questions, I have an extra slide at the end, their pre-K units were very rigorous. It had similar levels of cognitive demand as higher levels, but that in ways that were grade level appropriate. In District B, the interim assessments were open-ended tasks. They were the same kinds of tasks that were found in the curriculum. They were not meant to cover in the same way that multiple choice interim assessments are, and so they didn't have as much content coverage, but they had very similar profile in terms of cognitive demand. And finally, teacher professional development across early education and mathematics focused on the same small number of pedagogical strategies that were linked into the curriculum as well. And what was interesting here is that the PD models could not be more different between early ed and K and up, in part because of some funding issues, but the content of the PD in mathematics was very similar across. At the same time, the learning opportunities for school leaders were very different and were not well aligned to what the early ed and the curriculum and instruction department were doing. They really focused on school leaders choosing problems of practice, so it was a sort of bottom-up driven curriculum for school principals, and very few school principals chose either mathematics or early education to do their work with one another together. It was very difficult for the early education team or the mathematics team to get on the agenda for elementary principals. Also on Wednesday, I interviewed the director of math in this district, and she told me that in the last 3 years that they've had a math initiative, she got to work with school principals once over 3 years. So what that means is that the main learning opportunities for school leaders were not well aligned to the work in math generally, and rarely included instructional issues related to early childhood classrooms. The early ed department did do some professional development with principals who had PKs and TKs on their site, but they tended to focus on operations because that's what the principals asked for, was to focus on operational issues, because as you know, or as many of you know, there's a lot of paperwork, and it's two separate sort of rules and laws and guidelines, and that was a lot for elementary certified principals to learn. It was like a whole new world for them. Okay, and the instructional systems at this district were emergent. I'll sort of leave it at that. They had many of these things. They played out very differently. They were new in the district, so you didn't see sort of a fully formed system of instructional improvement. So the big question is, we have these differences, but how were they experienced at the school site from principals and teachers? And the big simplified overview is that school leaders and teachers alike perceive the district system to be more aligned and coherent in District A than District B. At the same time, teachers in District B were much better able to articulate and were largely supportive of instructional strategies and approaches that the district were supporting. It's you know, in some ways, maybe that's an obvious finding, but it actually suggests that what school districts place their bets on actually matters for what teachers and school leaders are experiencing. And just to give a little bit more flesh on the bones with this, hello. We interviewed school principals and school leaders in all the schools, and in District A, most of our interviewees report feeling supported by the district to support pre-K and TK classrooms on their school site. They especially point to the intensive professional development they received related to high-quality instruction in early childhood. So, for example, one told us, quote, "Our district really pushed the PD for principals with PKs and TKs on site, which focuses on early learning. So pre-K through grade 1, that really brought into my knowledge what's expected and what's appropriate for that age level. That's been huge." Another principal noted that participation in professional development had drastically influenced their thinking about instruction in the early grades. When asked about their responsibilities in relation to the preschool, school leaders identified supporting instruction as a key aspect of their role. So one principal stated that teacher evaluation and supporting instruction were the principal's biggest pieces when it came to preschool. Another said, quote, "We have to make sure that what we're providing what's required by the state law in connection to pre-K, but also providing a rigorous learning environment that's developmentally appropriate as well." The principals in school District B did not feel prepared to supervise pre-K, especially in terms of instruction. For example, one told us, quote, "I don't have that experience with preschool, so it's challenging. It's challenging to be supportive and offer evaluations and observations. I'm like, that was great, but I don't feel like I'm super qualified." When asked about their responsibility in relations to pre-K and TK on their campuses, school leaders in District B responded in operational terms rather than instructional ones. So for example, one explained, quote, "I oversee all the pre-Ks here. It deals with the operational aspects of licensing. We're a licensed facility. The instructional program, I would say right now where I am with pre-K is mostly around operational, because there's a ton of operational stuff with pre-K, then orchestrating the instructional stuff. So making sure the coaches are in the right spot, making sure we have release states for collaborative planning." So even the instructional stuff was very sort of administrative tasks. I think it needs a new battery. So then we just, sorry, don't go there yet. I'm so sorry about this. Okay, there's a missing slide, I think. So there's which you could, it's my favorite slide too, so I'm really, really sorry about this. Basically, we asked, it's a striking slide, so come talk to me, I'll show it to you afterwards. We asked teachers in surveys the extent to which their agreement with curriculum, instruction, and learning materials are well coordinated within and across grades. And in District A, I have to look at this to see if I can actually, it's very small. 71% of teachers within District A agreed that instruction and instructional materials and assessment were coordinated within grade, and 72% agreed that it was coordinated across grades. So that's alignment and continuity. Compared to District B, where 38% said it was coordinated within grade, and 18% said it was coordinated across grades. So this enormous difference in perceptions of alignment and continuity in mathematics specifically. And this is really interesting because our analysis of the instructional materials suggests that the reverse is true. That in District A, the connections are not as tight with the curriculum materials themselves, whereas in District B, they have this very smoothly well-aligned continuum in their instructional materials and across the grade levels, and teachers don't perceive it to be that way at all. And then the main oh, there it is. I skipped it. So you can sort of see it there, and I explained that already. And I even worked on getting the colors different and everything. Sorry, I'm just like lost. Okay. Last thing is the main instructional focus of the schools. In District A, the school leaders identified using the district adopted curricula and aligning instruction to standards as the main instructional priority in mathematics. Teachers echoed this. When asked about their main emphasis in mathematics, it was using the curriculum, making sure that their instruction was linked to the standards. Less attention was on specific instructional strategies other than the majority of teachers identified and principals identified hands-on instruction as being important in math. And that's compared to District B, where school leaders identified the specific pedagogical practices in mathematics and talked about the way that they were supporting them. This is things like math talks, just as an example of what I mean by that. And teachers also identified these strategies as the main focus on their, in their instruction in mathematics, not the curriculum. All right, just to pivot just a bit, we interviewed folks at the district and the school level on the challenges of fostering alignment and continuity in mathematics. And at the district level, this is looking across both districts because they were very similar in what they brought up. There's, of course, the challenges of working across district departments. This is sort of a legendary problem in a school district, especially large school districts. The people who supervise school principals sometimes are not well connected to curriculum and instruction. Early education is sometimes hard to fit into either or both. This played out differently in the two districts, but it was an issue that, that had to be overcome to do this work. The impact of separate policy systems for early ed and TK to 12. There are separate budgets, separate regulations and accountabilities. There's different training, pay, and schedules for pre-K and TK teachers. There's other policy and funding constraints. Pre-K to 3 efforts generally are funded by external grants. And those grants come with strings. So one of the reasons that the professional development model was different in one of the districts was because the professional development model was sort of encouraged by one of the funders for the work. So it made it really hard for them to create connections that way. Talk to any person who works in an early childhood department and they will have insufficient knowledge of early learning among district leaders. It's that they feel very much like they're constantly educating and constantly reminding that pre-Ks and TKs are part of the school system, even in school districts that self-identify as pre-K through 12. And finally, it's challenging to get mathematics onto the district agenda, period, for both early childhood and for elementary. At the school level, some of these are fairly similar. School principals in particular talk about the two different sets of rules and regulations. That's a knowledge burden, but it's also a paperwork burden. There's a lot involved in supervising early childhood stuff on your school. There's the different schedules for pre-K and TK to 12 teachers, which means that pre-K teachers are starting earlier, they're ending later. They don't have the same lunch hours. So if you are trying to build collaboration across teachers, it's extremely challenging. There's also status issues that come from different credentialing and salary schedules that also play a role in this trying to bring teachers together, and the physical separation of pre-K from other grades. That's rooted in the state's health and safety requirements for early childhood, but what it means is like pre-K teachers are entering from different doorways. They do yard duty in different places. Sometimes they have different offices that they go to. So sometimes the teachers don't even know each other on the same campus. So for principals trying to bring them together, it's very challenging. School emphasis on literacy instruction. In one of our districts, they had different attendance policies, student placement policies for pre-K than they did for TK and above. And that meant that you could do a great job with the pre-K kids on your school, but they may not even be able to attend that same school. Okay, takeaways. We see the results of different emphases at the school site. So district policy efforts to foster pre-K to 3 alignment and continuity, they matter for school efforts. These two systems placed their bets differently, and it was really reflected in teachers in schools, school leaders and teachers' experiences in the school site. It's probably not a hard sell for me to talk to you that districts matter and district leaderships matter, but in the broader world, people often just skip to the schools and they ignore the districts. And this really suggests that this is, to me, a really hopeful finding because it suggests that there's things that we can do about to create better connections. Most discussions of pre-K to 3 alignment and continuity focus on structure and policy with less focus on the particulars of coherent instruction in a given subject area. But it's the particulars that matter. They matter for helping teachers use new curricular materials in ways that foster coherent math instruction and that bridge grade levels. And the particulars matter for efforts to support teachers in learning to teach in ways that are consistent with the California Early Learning Foundations and Common Core. And they matter for efforts to support school leaders in encouraging and enabling teachers to shift instruction in that direction. At the same time, it appears that a focus on teaching and learning, the lesson of District B, is that intensive focus needs to be supported by a larger system of instructional improvement, not having the policies on paper, not by just having the policies on paper, but creating opportunities for people at various levels of the system to learn together how to better support mathematics instruction from pre-K through grade 3. And content-neutral strategies tend to default to literacy. Especially in early education, especially in elementary, and there's a lot of reasons for that I'm sure you know and that we can talk about more if you're interested. Last slide, implications for policymakers. It seems important, given this last point, that if we care about the development of kids, the early development of kids' mathematical thinking and reasoning and creating better connections between early education and elementary, that we provide encouragement and support, perhaps at the state level, for focusing pre-K elementary alignment efforts on mathematics. Most districts that do this across the nation start with literacy, and maybe they get to math, after 10 years or sooner. Second, streamline funding for pre-K and possibly connect it to K-12. The different funding streams create a lot of challenges to overcome at the district level. There's also multiple funding streams within pre-K. You have a school site with different pre-Ks are funded by different programs and have different rules and regulations, different schedules. It's very complicated. Try to foster greater alignment between pre-K and elementary in school teacher preparation and pay. And include early childhood as part of principal credentialing. Most elementary principals, in our they're elementary certified, but sometimes they're middle school certified. And in our study, all of them had been either elementary or middle school teachers, but in the upper elementary grades. So this was like this whole new world that they really didn't have good experience prior to coming into the principalship. So they were really starting from scratch. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to our panel.